horrid noise of their closing jaws, floods of water and blood rushing out of their mouths, and the clouds of vapor issuing from their nostrils were truly frightful. A fanciful description from the 18th century colonial naturalist William Bartram after his travels through the Florida swamps. The dictionary, however, simply describes the alligator as a large reptile of the southern United States, having a more rounded, broader snout than the crocodile. Few people would be quite so objective with their definitions. The alligator's reputation is often based on misinformation, fear, and a mystique fueled by wild tales handed down from generation to generation. No, alligators can't outrun a quarter horse over short distances. And no, they don't live to be 150, 250, or 500 years old. The truth about alligators is also quite different from the sensationalism of literature and film. In this program, an attempt will be made to separate fact from fiction by looking at the life cycle of the alligator in its natural environment.
Alligators are probably the most successful of all the conservation stories because in the 60s they were almost extinct. We had probably less than 20,000 alligators here in Florida. And what happened was they tried to pass laws to stop the poaching of the alligators, and they did, and that didn't really help. It just actually raised the price of the hides. And eventually what they did is they created a farming system and allowed alligator farming and permitting to take hold, and that brought the price down of the hides and made it more profitable for people to farm them, to actually poach them or take them from the wild. And that's pretty much what saved the alligator in Florida. And today we probably have more alligators in Florida than there have ever been.
There's an illusion that we understand everything there is to know about most animals. But in the case of the alligator, that's really untrue. Information exists about population size and management and preservation strategies. But relatively little is known about the general biology, the physiology, the internal workings of the alligator. It's only been in the last few years that alligators have been considered not as a source of valuable hide or gourmet meat, but as a species which is unique from others. The specific genus alligator arose in North America some 26 million years ago. The name is an anglicized version of El Lagarto, or giant lizard, which was given the animals by early Spanish settlers. The crocodilians, of which alligators make up 7 species, are the last remaining relics of the great age of reptiles. They're present-day reminders of the dinosaur. Alligators themselves have changed little over the last 65 million years, and far from being out of place in the modern world and thus doomed to certain extinction, usually remain masters of their environment. As recently as the 1950s, it was rare to see an alligator in the wild. It seemed as if they'd been hunted to extinction. Luckily, though, many escaped death at the hands of poachers because they could only be found in the more remote and inaccessible wetlands of Florida. Since 1973, however, they've been listed as an endangered species and protected by law. As a result, their numbers have increased dramatically. They now inhabit virtually every pond, stream, river, and lake in the state. The crocodile is the alligator's more widely known relative. It's primarily found in tropical regions and prefers salt water. Alligators are freshwater reptiles, found in wet habitats extending from the coastal regions of North and South Carolina, down to Florida, and across as far as East Texas. They're the most temperate of the crocodilians and range into more northerly latitudes than crocodiles. Other close relatives are the smaller Chinese alligator and the various species of South American caimans. The American alligator differs only slightly from the crocodile, living somewhat longer and usually shorter in length. The most distinctive difference is that the fourth mandibular tooth fits into the upper jaw and cannot be seen when the jaw is closed. The fact that a crocodile's teeth are more visible tend to make it look somewhat more ferocious than the alligator. This is more true, though, of alligators in the wild than those bred in captivity. Captive animals are frequently held together in large numbers, and they often rest on top of each other, causing the lower jaw to spread out, thus making the lower teeth more visible. Growth rate in alligators is affected by habitat, nutrition, and climate. Where food is abundant and it's warm nearly all year, as is the case in most alligator farms, growth is greatly accelerated. Alligators range in color from yellowish to almost completely black. They're well camouflaged in their green, brown, or darker tones and can be quite difficult to see. They seem to have the ability to adapt to their surroundings and the water in their habitat. There's no noticeable difference between males and females. Younger alligators, though, have prominent yellow markings which disappear as they mature. Alligators come in all shapes and sizes, from long and slender to short and fat. Up to about 7 feet, both sexes maintain the same growth rate. Stature variations are more noticeable in males, who grow on the average 4 or 5 feet longer than females. The usual length is between 6.5 and 13 feet. Some males have been discovered that measure up to 18 feet, however. As with all aquatic and semi-aquatic predators, alligators have eyes and nostrils set high on the head. This way they can breathe while floating almost totally submerged. They're able to remain perfectly still and almost invisible while stalking prey or avoiding the more dominant males in an area. A third eyelid, or nictating membrane, sweeps sideways across the eye to give more protection during diving. It's transparent and doesn't interfere with the alligator's vision. The eyes are large. The lens in each eye is a vertical slit, capable of expanding or contracting depending on the amount of light in an area. Alligators are easy to spot at night, as their eyes exhibit eye shine. When light is directed at them in the dark, the male's eyes shine red. The female's and younger alligators' eyes shine a greenish or bluish yellow. The ear is a narrow slit located immediately behind the eye. The nostrils and ears close while the alligator's underwater. When the ears are out of the water, hearing is acute. They also have a false palate or throat valve, consisting of a wide flap of skin at the back of the mouth, which closes the glottis and allows for underwater feeding. Alligators are powerful swimmers. Large compressed tails allow for easy movement through the water. The tail is long and heavy, tapering gradually from the hind legs to the end. While swimming, the legs are folded back against the body and tail. Alligators have short legs and awkward bodies. The limbs are quite weak and are primarily designed for movement on land. As with all crocodilians, they have a high walk. The limbs are brought in towards the body, thereby lifting it well clear of the ground. There's no webbing on the forelimbs, but webbing on the hind feet allows a swimming alligator with a sudden movement of the limbs and tail to sink quickly down and back when danger threatens. The toes are widely spread, enabling the alligator to move more readily in the water. This also helps them walk on land without sinking into the soft earth of the swamps. The head is large, long, and flat, with enormous jaws. The upper jaw extends stiffly from the skull, while the lower jaw is hinged and can be moved separately. The 80 or so teeth are designed for grasping rather than cutting food. Mature teeth are almost solid, while those of younger alligators are hollow and break quite easily. Each tooth contains a small replacement within its pulp cavity because the original teeth are often lost during feeding. Despite their antiquity, alligators have brains and hearts which are much more advanced than those of most reptiles. The ventricles of the heart are completely divided, and there's no mixture of arterial and venous blood. An oxygenated blood supply is thus available to the brain. The alligator also has a true cerebral cortex, allowing more learned as opposed to instinctive behavior. The back of the head is armored with heavy plates of bone. The body is covered with horny scales, usually rectangular in shape, arranged in transverse rows. These are separated from and connected to each other by narrow bands of heavy, wrinkled, flexible skin, except for the area at the base of the neck. The scales covering the back, in addition to providing protection, are important to the overall well-being of the alligator. As soon as the days get longer and warmer, alligators spend much of their time swimming lazily along the water's surface or basking on a riverbank.
We've all seen alligators pull up on shore and sit in the sun and bask, and they do this to heat their bodies. They're cold-blooded animals, and they need that heat from the sun to raise their internal temperature and drive their metabolic systems, drive their digestive system, for instance. But alligators don't have to pull out of the water to bask. They can actually bask while in the water. Those bony ridges that you see lining the back of the alligator are actually small bones embedded in the skin called osteoderms. And those osteoderms have a rich blood supply running through them. And almost like a radiator system, they're able to heat the blood as it passes through these osteoderms and as the sun shines on it. And then that warmed blood is carried throughout the body and heats the body as they stay in the water.
When spring comes to the Everglades, rivers, and lakes, it's a time of rebirth and regeneration. For the alligator, it's time to select a mate. Several distinctive behaviors are part of this process, one of which is bellowing. Alligators are quite vocal animals, more so than most reptile species are. In the spring months especially, the deep bellowing roars of male alligators can be heard echoing across the swamps. Although they can occur at any time of the year, these bellow vocalizations are closely associated with courtship behavior. Bellowing is contagious, and when one alligator starts, it stimulates others in the vicinity, and they end up in a bellowing chorus. This usually occurs first thing in the morning, with females participating alongside the males.
Male alligators, before the audible bellow, produce a subsonic or infrasonic bellow as well, which is projected from the middle of their body and passes out through the water. It's extremely powerful, and it causes the water around the body of the animal to dance up. I call it a water dance. The water dances up, almost like a fountain in a courtyard. It's a phenomenal display, extremely powerful, but below our level of hearing. We don't hear the vocalization being made, we only see the effects of it. And then that is immediately followed by the audible bellow, which we do hear. During bellowing, alligators go through a cadence of movement. The animal rises up out of the water, pulling its head well up out of the water, and the tail follows as a counterbalance to that huge bony head that alligator has. The animal gulps in air. You can actually see them forcing air down into their lungs. And then the animal drops into the water, and you see the body tense, and they produce this water dance display, and then immediately roar. Females bellow, but they don't produce this subsonic water dance. And so there's a very clear sexual dimorphism in these behaviors. Males instantly recognize when a female bellows, and females recognize that it's a male bellow because of this added component. Males and females will approach one another during bellowing, and very often we find females coming up to these large males as they're bellowing, and bellowing side by side with them. Then, once the bellowing exchange has occurred, the female begins courting the male, and often very vigorously. Females can be aggressive courters and encourage that male to court with her and ultimately to mate with her.
Alligators communicate among each other visually, as well as vocally. The way they hold their bodies in the water is an integral part of the interplay of dominance and subordination in an alligator population. It's possible to tell when animals are going to be aggressive simply by the way they posture. The head is held high in the water so that the teeth row is level with the water. The back is arched and the entire osteoderm pattern visible. The pelvis and tail may also be brought up out of the water. The animal is striving to appear as large and imposing as possible. Alligators attempting to appear non-aggressive, for instance, a male approaching a female during courtship, do the exact opposite. They stay low in the water, so that perhaps only the eyes and nostrils are visible. They attempt to be unimposing, almost invisible. As part of trying to establish dominance, alligators perform a social behavior referred to as a head slap or jaw clap. It's best described as a declaration of presence. The animal is simply stating that it's there. The alligator remains completely still for a period of about 15 seconds. Then slaps its head down into the water and snaps its jaws shut at the same time. The head slap is sometimes accompanied by a water dance and always ends with the alligator thrashing the water with its tail. Alligators tend to use the jaw clap when they've just moved into an area or just before leaving for another. With head up, tail up, the display draws the attention of other alligators, and they often react to this aggressively. Large alligators, sometimes during bellowing or after a head slap, attack quite suddenly. These are ferocious charges, particularly when both animals are trying to establish dominance in an area. Aggression among male alligators is not uncommon, particularly during courtship season. Males simply don't like other males bellowing or displaying near them. When this happens, one alligator will slowly approach the other, then suddenly lunge forward with its jaws wide open, arching the head and back, and propelling itself with its tail. These attacks are usually over as quickly as they begin, and calm is restored. Aggression is an important factor in the social balance of alligator populations. They regulate their own numbers, and juvenile males are excluded from breeding by the older, larger males. Distinctly different from these aggressive behavior patterns are those exhibited between courting alligators.
Courtship in alligators is an amazingly tender, languid sort of interaction between the two animals. It involves a lot of touching and pressing, the animals orienting to each other's head, and then moving along the side of the head, rubbing, touching, pushing along the side of the face and the neck, often pulling up onto the head and pressing the other animal underwater in sort of a really intimate interaction between the two. These courtship interactions can go on for long periods of time. I've seen alligators court for hours, back in a little quiet spot in the back of a lake, with no attempt to mount or to mate, just going through these tactile or touching interactions for long periods of time. An animal pressing on the other animal can feel how strongly that animal resists. An animal being pressed on can feel how strong it is being pressed down into the water. Size and strength and fitness are important in alligators in determining whether that is a proper potential mate for them. And so these pressing behaviors, the pushing and pressing of courtship, play a very important role, we think, in alligators making the decision as to whether to go ahead and mate with those animals. This long period of courtship is actually an extremely vital part of that whole behavior, because if a female is unreceptive, if she has not been stimulated into mating by this courtship ritual, then she simply has to move forward and the male will slip off or fall off. He can't maintain his position on the female if she doesn't cooperate. Mating is a really difficult position for alligators. The male has to pull himself on top of the female and embrace her quite strongly with his forearms, and then let his body slide off to one side of the female. And then he searches with his tail, trying to find her tail and get his tail underneath hers, and then draw the bases of the tail together so that mating can occur.
The steady increase in the number of alligators in Florida can be attributed to the fact that since most of the dominant males have been removed from the wild, younger males are more likely to breed. In the past, the older, stronger animals would have prevented the smaller males from mating. Additionally, they found it more difficult to mate successfully because of their size. Now, the larger animals are usually culled, or, in captive situations, kept out of the breeding population. About 2 or 3 weeks after mating, the female will build her nest. She scrapes together whatever vegetation she finds nearby, using her mouth, limbs, and tail, usually working at night for a 3 to 5 day period. She'll build close to the water, but slightly above the water level, so as to avoid flooding the eggs.
This is a perfect example of a big alligator nest. Generally, they'll be about 4 feet high, about 8 feet in circumference. You want to be very careful if you see one of these in the wild. They'll take an old log like this and take their claws and rip out big chunks of the rotten vegetation, or in this case, an old rotten log. They'll pile the debris up into a mound. The female alligator will generally lay the eggs in early June or late May. She'll lay a clutch of about 40 to 45 on the average, sometimes as many as 80. Generally, the mother will stay nearby and try to run off any intruders.
Even with this protection, the survival rate is quite low. As with all crocodilians, the female alligator exhibits a great deal of pre- as well as postnatal care, but the eggs cannot always be protected for the 2 to 3 month incubation period. Opportunistic birds, snakes, and raccoons are among those predators constantly raiding the nests. The mother stays in the vicinity of the nest as much as possible. Often she'll spend a good portion of each day simply perched on top of it, keeping guard. The ellipse-shaped eggs are deposited in a hollow cavity in the center. The warmth of the nest not only affects the rate of embryonic development, but also the sex of the hatchlings. A temperature lower than 86 degrees Fahrenheit between the 7th and 21st days of incubation results in all female babies. Temperatures higher than 93 degrees produce all males. When ready to hatch, the babies respond to any kind of vibration, such as the mother crawling over the nest area. They break out of their shells and begin a high-pitched grunting noise. The mother reacts, opening up a crater on the side of the nest with her mouth and forelimbs, so the hatchlings can easily get out. They'll then make their way to the nearby water.
This fella here is only about 2 months old. And you can hear the little noise he's making. He's using the back part of his throat here to emit this sound, and it's a social call, much like a quail would make to let other quail know that they're around. I'm gonna tap on the snoot here and take a look. He's got all the dental equipment that a full-grown adult has, roughly between 70 and 80 teeth. At this point, he's eating nymphs and larval stage creatures. Often he'll eat small frogs and crayfish and things like that to get started. These little alligators are perfectly suited for their life in the water. Even the construction of their nose and their eyes help them in securing food. You can see the nose or the nostrils are on top. They're called nares, and they rest on a little hump on the top of his nose. And with these, he can breathe or snorkel right up close to his prey and grab it. His eyes will submerge down into sockets if he happens to run into a limb or wants to go under a lily pad without hurting his eyes. We're going to let this little fella go. Let him grow up.
During the 1950s, overhunting and poaching severely depleted the total population. Their valuable hides were in great demand, bringing in around $6 a foot. Today, it's closer to $47. Poachers would often hook the alligators on the end of long poles. Once killed, the animal would be skinned and the carcass left where it lay. Since being protected beginning in the 1960s, legislation has led to several relocation, tagging, and research programs. The annual egg harvest is one of many activities designed to control and safeguard the alligator population. A secondary but equally important goal is to preserve the wetland habitats that are important to all wildlife. The search for alligator nests is generally conducted from the air. Airboat crews are then directed to the site. This is an extensive project covering some 30 different public wetland areas, and about 100 private landowners are also involved in the program. This totals about 300,000 acres of alligator habitat. Research indicates that there is around a 15% surplus of alligators at any given time. About that many over 4 feet in length are harvested annually. This doesn't seem to affect the number of juvenile alligators needed to replace the older males.
The Game Commission had initiated some programs on adult harvest of alligators, and there was also interest from the farmers in harvesting eggs and hatchlings for their programs. The Game Commission couldn't afford to do the research that was necessary for that, so they made an arrangement between the university and the co-op unit and the farmers to do the research. In essence, the farmers are paying a lion's share of the cost for the research that the Game Commission is eventually going to use to regulate the take of eggs and hatchlings. But we couldn't do that research without a significant contribution on the part of the university, the Game Commission, and the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay. Nest number 9. Nest number 9.
Once the nest has been reached, the research team records information about its size and location. The temperature and its makeup are also noted. One of the reasons sawgrass, spartina, and cordgrass are favored nesting materials is because they tend to grow in clumps. They are therefore slightly elevated above the marsh level. This is a key factor in avoiding flooding and preventing the eggs from suffocating.
Yeah, we've definitely got at least, it's going to be partially flooded. There's at least a few eggs that are underwater. What we try to do is mark all the eggs on the top of the axis for upright orientation. Egg deposition has just occurred, and you want to keep the eggs in the same initial position for the attachment of the embryo. If the eggs are jarred or turned before the embryo is attached and fully developed, you can kill the embryo. So, not knowing at what stage of development you're at, all the eggs are marked initially before we remove them from the egg cavity.
Each two-person team includes one volunteer to assist the Fish and Wildlife personnel. Together, they provide detailed descriptions of the condition of the eggs with respect to fertility and position in the nest.
We put them in this orientation. They're put in from the bottom left and work in a serpentine fashion as we take the eggs from the highest eggs, working our way back through as we go into the bottom of the nest. Then when we get to one end of the tray, I'll put another layer of nesting material on top, and we'll continue that fashion and bring the eggs back out and end up with the last eggs on the top. That way, when they go back to the incubators, the people know they'll take them back out in the same order, and they'll know exactly the configuration and the order of where the eggs came from the original nest.
We haven't observed the female.
No. Very seldom we actually see a female at the nest. Usually by the time the helicopter has come over the nest and has shown us where the location of the nest is in time, we bring the airboat in and bring all our equipment. She's usually long gone, submerged down.
Research has shown that up to 50% of the annual egg production in an area can be removed without any negative impact on the alligator population. This means that some 15,000 to 20,000 eggs are collected each year.
The egg collections are conducted as early as we can conduct them and make sure we can get a fair number of clutches from the nest that we see. After they've been collected, we transport the eggs back up here to incubators, and we have 2 incubators at this facility.
We got Okeechobee North, number 62, 37 eggs.
We aren't sure what the exact trigger is that causes alligators to hatch. We do know that they hatch all within a short period of time, that they all achieve the developmental stage that they need to be in to hatch at all about the same rate. And we suspect that they're programmed to hatch out in a certain number of days or at a certain developmental stage. It's temperature dependent. The warmer the nest, the faster that they'll hatch out. But it's usually about 65 days for alligator eggs.
Here we go. Make sure we have the right number of empty eggs. Sometimes they get loose in the incubator. Chase them in. There's 8. Okay. Generally want to give them 2 or 3 days to hatch out once they begin. Some of them will be a little bit behind, a day or so behind their other siblings. Greg, it looks like we have a couple of dead ones.
Okay.
Let's cut those out and see when they die. Let me get. We had how many? 13 hatch?
Looks like he died early. Span didn't go around. He's about 27 days old.
You have real white membrane here, whereas this is real dark, and then the eggshell is degraded properly on this live one. So he's in there about to hatch, versus this one.
32 days old.
The remaining eggs will be replaced in the incubator for another day or so. The 9 to 10 inch or 24 to 25 centimeter long hatchlings, each weighing between 60 and 70 grams, are tagged so that researchers can monitor their progress.
Look at survival rates or growth rates, things like that. They generally stay on a year or 2 years at the farms.
Tag number came from which lake and which farm it goes to.
We found that there's a variable number of eggs that hatch out of each clutch. What we found here in Florida was that even if an egg was not inundated with water, there were still problems with a lot of the eggs hatching. And what we suspect is a number of different things. First of all, we suspect that the egg is probably something wrong either with the egg or the sperm that's causing this problem. Because most of these eggs that we're having die on us are dying very early in incubation. Some of them are dying before they're laid. And that gives us a good indication that the problem is with the quality of the egg or the sperm. Some possible causes of this could be environmental. The nutrition that the female receives can affect the viability of eggs. They found that over in some research in Louisiana where diets significantly affected the hatch rates of their eggs. Alligators on all fish diets were underperforming alligators that were fed all red meat diets with lots of vitamins. So nutrition could be a problem. Another problem could be stress. Some other studies they've done in Louisiana have found out that when alligators are crowded into small areas, that the stress levels rise, their functioning of their hormones is changed, and the resulting egg viability is reduced. Something that may be happening here in Florida and is happening at least on one area are pesticide problems. There's all sorts of chemicals being dumped in the waters here in Florida. In one instance on Lake Apopka, there was a pesticide spill in 1980, and we saw an immediate decline in the alligator population, and also found very low viability rates, egg viability rates, in conjunction with that decline. In recent years, egg viability on the lake has been increasing a little bit after bottoming out in the mid-80s, and also the population's been increasing a little bit. So there's a very strong association between that pesticide spill and population decline and poor egg viability.
Once tagged, the hatchlings are either released into natural habitats where they can be protected or sent to alligator farms. One such farm is Gatorland, near Orlando, Florida. As a commercial farm and research facility, Gatorland, working in conjunction with the University of Florida, produced the world's first hatchlings born as a result of artificial insemination. Visitors to the park, in addition to being able to sample farm-raised alligator meat and observe the alligators in natural settings, can watch the entertainment shows. There are also somewhat more informative performances.
Here we go. They all look down there. That's the working gear of Gator. He's got 82 extremely sharp, cone-shaped teeth. Now these teeth designed for gripping and not prey. Look down the back of the mouth, he's got a flap of skin. It's called the epiglottis. That's there to keep water from rushing down into his lungs. We're going to press keep that mouth shut now.
Another Florida attraction is the multi-themed 350-acre nature park at Silver Springs near Ocala. Here, as in several other parks, a wide range of wildlife can be seen free roaming along the banks of the Silver River. Whether it's a ride on the Lost Voyage, the Jungle Cruise, or the Jeep Safari Adventure, attempts are made to educate and inform visitors about the environment. In addition to a supervised petting zoo for children, the park presents a variety of informative shows daily.
What's going on here is very scientific. The animal's brain is a little bit smaller than his brain cavity. So when we turn him upside down in this somewhat unnatural position, his brain's going to very subtly and slightly shift position and make contact with the top of the skull. And when it does so, we haven't actually put him to sleep. We've, in a sense, turned out a little light switch in his nervous system. Now, the notion of rubbing the belly to put him to sleep is a lot of old-timey showmanship, and it is designed to make you, the audience, think that I've put this alligator to sleep. But I think you can agree with me that the alligator has really done it all himself. Now, don't you wish you could put the kids to sleep that way? Now, left upside down like this, he will wake up on his own here in just a moment or two, but I've got something else I'd like to show you, so let's turn him over and see what kind of mood he's in. Real good one.
In the common perception, alligators are extremely dangerous animals. And, it's not that they don't have the potential to be dangerous, it's just that they are unlikely to be. We do have problems with alligators eating people's dogs, for instance. Dogs are small mammals, and that's what alligators eat, and we just happen to know when they eat one of those rather than a raccoon or a possum or something like that.
Alligators are carnivores and will eat almost any animal that can be overcome. Well camouflaged, extremely patient, and often difficult to spot in the water, the element of surprise is a valuable weapon. They patrol for food unfettered by conscience and can be deadly, efficient hunters.
Alligators are the dominant predator in the aquatic ecosystem in which they live. These apex predators play very important roles, not only in regulating their own populations, they do that as well, but they're important in regulating population densities, population sizes of all the prey organisms upon which they feed as well. We know that predators, by preying on these other animals, actually allow a much greater diversity of prey species to live in an ecosystem than would without these top predators. So They are important in that sense. Alligators play an important role in the overall stability of aquatic systems by keeping waterways open, or at times of drought actually keeping water available to the host of other organisms that live in those communities. It's only the alligator holes, these areas that have been cleared away and deepened by alligators, at which water is still exposed to the surface and is available to small fish and wading birds and small mammals and a host of species that live there and would be unable to live there if the alligator weren't present.
The alligator's successful return from the brink of extinction hasn't happened without some problems. Florida's human population has been steadily increasing. Habitat that was once called swamp now houses retirees from parts of the country where alligators exist only in nightmares. The number of complaint calls about nuisance alligators has risen by almost 2,000 a year. The alligator's future will be secure for many generations to come. Strict wetland protection and conservation statutes are designed to preserve its natural habitat. The management program and restrictions on harvesting maintain the population at reasonable numbers. In the final analysis, it's a success story, one that proves that public and private interests can join together for the good of all concerned.